We proceed to solve problem number 5. The first step in solving any problem is to carefully read and understand the description. This is really important. So let's do it. Prompt the user to enter number of elements n, min, and max. Generate an array of n random int elements between min and max. Create an array list, arrayL, containing all the differences between each element and the previous one. Let's see if we can understand it using Excel. So we are given the number of elements, the min and maximum random values that the array can have. We will need to generate the array with random values between min and max and the number of elements that the user enter. So suppose that here at the top, here on row 2, we have the index of each element of the array. Now what it's asking us to do is to calculate the difference between each element and its previous one. Clearly, the first element will not have any difference because there is no element before this one, right? There is no element prior to this one. So we start at element with index number 1, and then we calculate the difference with the previous value. In the case of Excel, the formula will be D3 minus C3. That difference is 2, because 9 minus 7 is 2. Now, we are going to increment the index to position 2. And once again, we calculate the difference between the current element minus the previous element. 20 minus 9 is 11. We proceed to calculate all the other differences until we reach the last element. So what we need to have is a method that will return an array list with all the differences. So it receives the array as input, and it returns an array list with all the differences. Let's go ahead and do it using Eclipse. We will need to import the java.util library because we are going to receive input from the user and because we will also use the ArrayList class. So we are going to need to define the array. Let's call it num_array, and this is going to be an array of integers. Now we know that every array needs to have a fixed number of elements, but at the beginning we don't know how many elements we are going to have because the user needs to enter that information. We'll also need to set up a scanner variable for user input. Then we need our n, min, and max variables. They are going to be of type int because they have no decimals. We will also need an array list. That array list is going to be of type integer. Let's call it diff list. So we need to prompt the user for the appropriate values. We declare, then we assign n to whatever value the user enters. We proceed to do the same thing with min and max. So now, if the user enters, for example, 10, 0, and 50, then the variable n will be equal to 10 because that is the first value that the user entered. Min will be equal to 0 because that's the second value that the user entered. and max will be equal to 50 because that is the last value that the user entered. We are going to need some methods. The first one will be ran between. This method receives the min and max values and return a random value between min and max. We have to make sure that we cast a value to an integer. So we are going to use the math@random method that returns a random value between 0 and 1 excluding 1. So we are going to multiply that times the difference between max minus min plus 1. And then we are going to add min. This will return a random value between min and max. So remember, math@random returns a random value between 0 and 1 excluding 1. When we'll multiply this value times the difference between max and min, is going to give us values between this range, and we need to add 1 because this math@random will never return 1. That's why we need to add 1 so that this max value can also be generated. And also we need to add min after we have casted this entire result into an integer. The next method we are going to need is the fill with random method. This method does not return anything, but it receives an array of integer, the min, and the max values. Now we proceed to loop through all the elements of the array with the for loop. Okay, and then we are going to make array I equals to ran between min and max. So this method is going to fill an array with random integer values between min and max. Okay, so now we are ready to create the calculate differences method. Now this method will return an array list of integer. We need to declare an array list of integers that is going to be local to this method. And this array list is what we are going to return with this method. Now we will need a for loop, but we are not going to start at 0. We are going to start at 1 because we need to subtract the differences. We need to subtract the differences between the current value and its previous one. If we start at 0, when we try to retrieve the value of the previous element, we are going to get an index out of bound error. So now we are going to add the current difference. So that'll be the difference between the current element, which is going to be array I, minus the previous element, which is going to be array I minus 1, right? Because I is the looping variable that is going to be equal to 1 in the first iteration, then is going to increment its value by 1, so it's going to be 2 in the second iteration, 3 in the second iteration, and so forth until it reaches the last index. On each iteration, it is going to add the difference between the current element, that is going to be array I, minus the previous element, which is array I minus 1. Let's go ahead and save with Control S and proceed to add all these methods to the main method. So we need to initialize num array with the number of values that the user entered, and that will be the value of n. Now we need to call the fillWithRandom method, and we are going to pass numArray as parameter, min, and max. Let's go ahead and display it. Once we have displayed, we need to calculate the differences. So our diff list, ArrayList, will be equal to calcdiff. And we need to pass the numArray as parameter. Then all the differences will be stored in this diff list ArrayList. The last step will be to display those differences, and we could copy line 26 and replace it for differences. And now we also need to add the ArrayList. But we cannot use it directly. We need to convert it to an array. Let's go ahead and run our program. We are going to enter 20 for n, 0 for min, and 20 for max. Let's see if this result is correct. The first difference will be 13 minus 14, and that is minus 1. The second difference is 12 minus 13. It is minus 1. The next difference will be 11 minus 12. That is minus 1. 2 minus 11, that's minus 9. 20 minus 2, that's minus 18, and so forth. It appears that our program is working correctly.